Hey everybody, it's Robyn Dunt from ArtTop10.com, and I'm very pleased today to be chatting with Benjamin Deakin here at the Cello Factory at Horizon, Alexander Hinks's crazy contemporary landscape exhibition. So, Ben, tell me a little bit about this wonderful piece.
So this painting is, it's a kind of composite of various ideas about landscape, and one of my sort of prevailing interests is in how art history is sort of informs how we still engage with landscape as a concept today. If you think of landscape as an idea rather than as a thing. So I quite often use kind of romantic, or sort of tropes from romantic landscape painting and combine them with other sort of elements that you might be sort of familiar with from art historical painting. In this case, kind of your kind of classic ruination of sort of neoclassical period. So this is scraps of the Roman Forum, an archaeological site in Cyprus, the Matterhorn, obviously, and then some formal garden design from Richmond in England.
Richmond?
Yeah, so that's from Ham House.
Oh really? Which bit's from Ham House?
Yeah, the sculpture, the wrapped sculpture.
Oh, that's from Ham House when they cover it up for the winter.
Where they cover it up for the winter. So again, I'm sort of interested in value, how value gets ascribed to places. So that's a kind of metaphor for like preservation, conservation, which are all like kind of key concepts in how we think about, you know, landscape and landscape architecture, conservation, national parks, you know, environmentalism, all that sort of thing. So I'm trying to sort of cram a lot of ideas in. Yeah. But actually, the trigger for this painting came from a short story by Richard Brautigan, the kind of early beat poet from the west coast of America.
Oh, check it out.
Yeah. So he wrote this book of short stories called Trout Fishing in America.
Okay, I've heard of the book.
And without going into too much detail, the protagonist is obsessed with trout fishing. And he goes on these very surrealist kind of capers all across the American landscape in pursuit of trout fishing. But trout fishing becomes a sort of metaphor for politics and for relationships, all sorts of things. Trout fishing is taken in a very loose term. So trout fishing in America is the name of the protagonist. Okay. So the book is also like a person. It's that sounds really cool. It's a very odd book. However, in it, the protagonist hears about a salvage yard, as in a junkyard, where they were selling sections of trout stream by the yard. Oh man, check that out. So I just love this idea that you could go to a salvage yard, and next to the sink collection, or the weird sort of sculpture, fiberglass sculpture bit, or they've got your plastic Elvises and stuff, and then over there you've got some mantelpieces, and then over there's some lengths of trout stream, and checking them out and saying, there's a trout look really good in that bit. Anyway, it's absurd. I'll just
transport that back in a weird.
So obviously you can't. I mean, you couldn't paint that literally, but I kind of like the idea that these sort of ideas get sort of assembled and discarded and sort of shunted to one side as different layers of history kind of come over and raise the value of certain places and demote others. So, like the Matterhorn is a sort of emblem of kind of conquest and sort of usually male sort of endeavor.
It is very much so, isn't it?
In the Alps in the 19th century, and then gets sort of turned into a sort of chintzy kind of kitsch icon later in the 20th century. So I'm sort of hopefully combining those ideas. So you've got something like the Roman Forum, it's very highbrow and sort of formal, and everyone goes, oh yes, that's a very important thing. Next to something quite kitsch.
And do you have a soft spot for everything you put in the picture?
Absolutely, And in an earlier series of paintings, sort of I was sort of trying to play with the idea of ruins, more in the sense of how images of ruination can play out in film and then video games and that sort of sci-fi movies, the big disaster movies. They kind of employ all these tropes from the history of painting.
Yeah, intriguing. They do, don't they?
So it all comes from a lot of love for these sort of places.
And does each bit do you give them a kind of different style? Did you give the Richmondy Ham House bit a sort of more vibrant style? Are they meant to sort of stand out against each other? Or?
Yeah, there was meant to be a bit of a clash. Again, I kind of sort of conveying that idea that, you know, the aesthetics change over time, so different, giving it a slightly different aesthetic to things. There's a more sort of prosaic reason why, which is that this painting took me years. Oh, right. It was a sort of period when I was like really in my, you know, much more in the sort of dappled light kind of soft phase, and then later on I was sort of, the kind of harder-edged thing came in later.
Oh, that's quite cool, because there's like a sort of history of you in there as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, very nice, very nice. And I like the way you play with that sense of space, that this is as a sort of painting, no matter on the background.
Yeah, whereas a sort of, monolith.
Yeah, it is a monolith, isn't it?
There's a monolith, so again, sort of, hopefully a kind of visual games there in a way.
Yeah, and this kind of slightly unnerving cage.
So this was some sort of underwater Roman heating system, I think. You know, they used to use they used to channel hot water under the buildings to kind of to heat them. Incredibly sophisticated technology for its time. But that particular site was really fascinating. So on the sort of upland coast above, on the sort of cliffs above the sea in Cyprus, and there's multiple sort of large country manor houses being built on top of one another. So you had sort of ancient classical kind of Greek one, and then there was a Roman one on top of that, and then there was something else on top of that. And then they'd all get sort of compressed into this single archaeological site where, you know, different millennia or certainly different centuries were sort of inches one above the other, and you'd scrape through one layer and you'd be 200 years further back in time. So the sort of idea of the compression of history was something I was sort of interested in.
That's really cool, which is in the paintings as well, really, isn't it?
Sort of, So there's quite a lot going on in this one. It's not it's a busy painting conveying lots of,
but it works quite nicely.
A jumble of lots of ideas.
Yeah, it works nicely just on a visual level. I mean, I love the sort of chessboardy bit at the bottom, and the different styles are really cool. I like it. It's really nice.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I was curious, because a lot of your stuff obviously is about travel.
Yeah.
So did COVID and the rest of that mess you up for a couple of years?
Well, it did for everyone, and obviously. But I think it really brought home how privileged we are in coming from this, this time and this part of Western Europe. To be able to travel in ordinary times, and that's suddenly brought into harsh relief when that privilege is taken away from you. And I know a lot of people who have similar levels of wonders to mine who felt the same. But did it change the way you work? Did you find yourself working off more things nearby? Initially, and certainly I think we all felt that sort of creative people of all in all types of media. I think kind of fell back on the near at hand initially, and then there was a series of paintings which I made subsequently, which became which are not represented in this show, but were from a trip in the Himalayas in 2019. So just before.
Just before. Check it out.
But again, like that experience, talking to the Nepali people when we were on that trip, hiking up into the mountains and hearing about their wanderlust, which was completely frustrated by the fact that they can't get visas. You know, if you come from a country like that, you can't travel the way we can, and we take it for granted. So I think my sort of perception of travel has certainly altered a little bit.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. Right. Let's go up and see your other piece up the stairs. So Ben, tell me about this one.
So this painting kind of refers to lots of the ideas we were talking about downstairs with the other painting. This idea that history, the history of painting is sort of replayed in real life in various ways, and like the sort of tropes or kind of iconic moments in art history sort of find a new voice in the contemporary world. So this painting is of a sort of dry chemical lake.
Oh, really?
That I visited on a residency at Parda Studios in Lisbon, and we had this privileged tour to round this old chemical plant where the residency is sited.
Oh, okay.
And it was a bit like standing. I don't know if you're familiar with Solaris, the Tchaikovsky film. So obviously the lake there, which is sort of it kind of keeps creating elements from the spaceship. The lives of the people on the spaceship, and they think they're hallucinating them, but the lake is actually, this sort of weird lake is creating these. So this dry lake, suddenly, in the middle of it, I suddenly found this moment which seems like it had just come out of Caspar David Friedrich's painting of the ice of the shipwreck in the Arctic. So a very famous sort of Sea of Ice, I think it's called. A really iconic moment in 19th century Germany.
Absolutely. You resisted not to put. Wasn't there a little figure standing on?
No. There's a shipwreck. There's a shipwreck here, and then there's like all sorts of little jokes and clues, and it's quite a sort of weirdly jokey painting, despite its very somber subject. And it was really controversial, that painting in its day. But because it sort of poked fun at the idea of empire and of conquest and sort of exploration. It was like a bit of a it was, I think, controversial at the time. Anyway, I was more sort of keen on, sort of intrigued by the idea that, this dry, chemical, man-made lake that was full of all these weird, like copper sulfate and other minerals that made this incredibly surreal atmosphere.
So Ben, it was safe to go to this extraordinary place, was it? There weren't sort of mad chemicals in the ground going to poison you?
Well, we were told it had been decontaminated. So it was so fascinating. I think we just sort of took them on trust. But I mean, it was still full of lots of odd things. I mean, without wanting to play the Tarkovsky card too heavily, it really was like being in the zone in Stalker or something. It was everything had sort of strange properties, and you couldn't work out what their uses had been in some cases.
And you said there was like weird coloured mould and black liquids moving around, all sorts of
strange things.
Strange stuff.
Weird moulds and purple sand, black and purple sand, sort of. I mean, goodness knows what they were. And they'd just been dumping all this stuff into these big sump-like lakes, and they'd all dried out. So, hopefully we didn't take any souvenirs.
No, it's really cool. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting, actually. It was fascinating to hear about them. It was lovely to hear all the stories behind them. There's a real richness to what's in there. So, I've loved it. Thanks a lot, Ben. Enjoyed it.